Hello, Views of the Future. Endragh here, and welcome to a new series, Light Fantastic by Terry Pratchett. I know I didn't do one yesterday. I'm sorry about that. I couldn't find the book, which was a problem. So yeah, no yesterday one, but I'm recording one today. So we're gonna just jump right into it. No ifs, ands, buts about it, but all the fancy writing because there's a prologue. I'm gonna be terrible in this book because just because I know of what I know. All right. The first word, really? The sun rose slowly, as if it wasn't sure it was worth all the effort. Another disk day dawned, but very gradually, and this is why. When light encounters a strong magical field, it loses all sense of urgency. It slows right down, and on the Discworld the magic was embarrassingly strong, which meant that the soft yellow light of dawn flowed over the sleeping landscape like the caress of a gentle lover, or, as some would have it, like golden syrup. It paused to fill up valleys, it piled up against mountain ranges. When it reached Coral Celestri, the 10-mile spike of gray stone and green ice that marked the hub of the disk and was the home of the gods, it built up in heaps until it finally crashed in a giant lazy tsunami as silent as velvet, across the dark landscape beyond. It was a sight to be seen on no other world. Of course, no other world was carried through the starry infinity on the back of 4 giant elephants, who were themselves perched on the shell of a giant turtle. His name, or her name, according to another school of thought, was Great Attune. He, or, as it may be, she, will not take a center role in what follows, but it is vital to an understanding of the disk that he, or she, is there, down below the mines and sea ooze and fake fossil bones put there by a creator with nothing better to do than unset astrologists and give them silly ideas. Let's try that again. She is there, down below the mines and sea ooze and fake fossil bones put there by a creator with nothing better to do than upset archaeologists and give them silly ideas. There we go. Great Attune, the star turtle, shell frosted with frozen methane, pitted with meteor craters, and scored with astral dust. Great Attune, with eyes like ancient seas, and a brain the size of a continent, through which thoughts move like little glittering glaciers. The Great Attune of the great slow sad flippers and star-polished carapace, laboring through the galactic night under the weight of the disk. As large as the worlds, as old as time, as patient as a brick. Actually, the philosophers had got it all wrong. Great Attune is in fact having a great time. Great Attune is the only creature in the entire universe that knows exactly where it is going. Of course, philosophers have debated for years about where Great Attune might be going, and have often said how worried they are that they might never find out. They're due to find out in about 2 months, and then they're really going to worry. Something else that has long worried the more imaginative philosophers on the disk is the question of Great Attune's sex, and quite a lot of time and trouble has been spent in trying to establish it once and for all. In fact, as the great dark shape drifts past like an endless tortoiseshell hairbrush, the results of the last efforts are just coming into view. Tumbling past, totally out of control, is the bronze shell of the potent Voyage, a sort of Neolithic spaceship built and pushed over the edge by the astronomer priests of Kroll, which is conveniently situated on the very rim of the world and proves, whatever people say, that there is such a thing as a free launch. Inside the ship is Twoflower, the disk's first tourist. He has recently spent some months exploring it, and now is rapidly leaving it for reasons that are rather complicated but have to do with an attempt to escape from Kroll. This attempt has been 1,000% successful, but despite all the evidence that he may be the disk's last tourist as well, he is enjoying the view. Plunging along some 2 miles above him is Rincewind the Wizard, in what on the disk's passes for a spacesuit. Picture it as a diving suit designed by man who have never seen the sea. 6 months ago he was a perfectly ordinary failed wizard. Then he met Twoflower, was employed at an outrageous salary as his guide, and had spent most of the intervening time being shot at, terrorized, chased, and hanged from high places with no hope of salvation or, as is the case now, dropping from high places. He isn't looking at the view because his past life keeps flashing in front of his eyes and getting in the way. He is learning why it is that when you put on a spacesuit, it is very vitally important not to forget the helmet. A lot more could be included now to explain why these two are dropping out of the world, and why Twoflower's luggage, last seen desperately trying to follow him on hundreds of little legs, is no ordinary suitcase. But such questions take time, and could be more trouble than they are worth. For example, it is said that someone at a party once asked the famous philosopher Lee Tin Weedle, "Why are you here?" and the reply took 3 years. What is far more important is an event happening way overhead, far above Attune, the elephants, and the rapidly expiring wizard. The very fabric of time and space is about to be put through the ringer. The air was greasy with a distinct feel of magic, and arcade with the smoke of candles made of black wax, whose precise origin a wise man wouldn't inquire about. There was something very strange about this room deep in the cellar of Unseen University. The Disc's premier college of magic. For one thing, it seemed to have too many dimensions. Not exactly visible, just hovering out of eyeshot. The walls were covered with occult symbols, and most of the floor was taken up by the eightfold seal of status, generally agreed in magical circles to have all the stopping power of a well-aimed half-brick. The only furniture in the room was a lecture of dark wood, carved into the shape of a bird. Well, to be frank, into the shape of a winged thing it is probably best not to examine too closely. And on the lecture, fastened to it by a heavy chain covered in padlocks, was a book. A large, but not particularly impressive, book. Other books in the university's libraries had covers inlaid with rare jewels and fascinating wood, or bound with dragon skin. This one was just a rather tatty leather. It looked the sort of book described in library categories as slightly foxed, although it would be more honest to admit that it looked as though it had been badgered, wolved, and possibly bared as well. Metal clasps held it shut. They weren't decorated, they were just very heavy, like the chains, which didn't so much attach the book to the lecture as tether it. They looked like the work of someone who had spent They looked like the work of someone who had a pretty defined aim in mind, and who had spent most of his life making training harnesses for elephants. The air thickened and swirled. The pages of the book began to crinkle in a quite horrible, deliberate way, and blue light spiked out from between them. The silence of the room crowded in like a fist, slowly being clenched. Half a dozen wizards in their nightshades were taking turns to peer in through the little grill in the door. No wizard could sleep with that sort of thing going on. The buildup of raw magic was rising through the university like a tide. "Right," said a voice. "What's going on? And why wasn't I summoned?" Galder Weatherwax, Supreme Grand Conjurer of the Order of the Seven Star, Lord Imperil of the Second Staff, 8th level in person, is Epicin, and 304th Chancellor of Unseen, the 304th Chancellor of Unseen University, wasn't simply an impressive sight, even in his red nightshade with the hand-embroidered mystical runes, even in his long cap with the bauble on, even with the wee whittle winky candlestick in his hand. He even managed to very nearly pull it off in fluffy pompon slippers as well. 6 frightened faces turned towards him. You were summoned, Lord," said one of the under-wizards. "That's why you're here," he added helpfully. "I mean, why wasn't I summoned before?" snapped Galder, pushing his way to the grill. Before who, Lord?" said the wizard. Galder glared at him, and ventured a quick glance through the grill. The air in the room was now sparkling with tiny flashes of dust mold, incinerated in the flow of raw magic. The seal of statics was beginning to blister and curl up at the edges. The book in question was called the Octave, and quite obviously it was no ordinary book. There are, of course, many famous books of magic. Many talk of the Necromancer Rotelicomicon, as its pages made of with its pages made of ancient lizard skin. Some may point to the book of Going Forth Around 11ish, written by the mystical and rather lazy Laminsek. Some may recall the bumper fun grimoire, reputedly containing the one original joke left in the universe, but they all were mere pamphlets when compared to the Octave, which the creator of the universe reprudently left behind, with characteristic abnegedness shortly after completing his major work. The 8 spells imprisoned in its pages led a secret and complex life of their own, and it was generally believed that Galdur's brow furrowed as he stared into the troubled room. Of course, there were only 7 spells now. Some young idiot of a student wizard had stolen a look at the book one day, and one of the spells had escaped and lodged in his mind. No one had ever managed to get to the bottom of how it had happened. What was his name now? Windswand? Octarine and purple spark glittered on the spine of the book. A thin curl of smoke was beginning to rise from the lecture, and the heavy metal clasps that held the book shut were definitely beginning to look strained. "Why are the spells so restless?" said one. "Why are the spells so restless?" said one of the young wizards. Galdur shrugged. He couldn't show it, of course, but he was beginning to be really worried. As a skilled 8th level wizard, he could see the half-imaginary shapes that appeared momentarily in the vibrant air, wheeling and beckoning, in much the same way that gnats appeared before a thunderstorm. Really heavy build-up of magic always attracted things from the chaotic dungeon dimension. Nasty things, all misplaced organs and spittle, forever searching for any gap through which they may slide into the world of man. Which this has a note. Hold on. Note time. They won't be described, since even the pretty ones looked like the offspring of an octopus and a bicycle. It is well known that things from undesirable universes are always seeking an entrance into this one, which is the physical equivalent of a handy from the bus and which is the physical equivalent of handy for the buses and closers to the shops. I don't get that one, but alright. This has to be stopped. "I shall need a volunteer," he says firmly. There was a sudden silence. The only sound came from behind the door. It was the nasty little noise of metal parting under stress. "Very well, then," he said. "In that case, I shall need some silver tweezers and 2 pints of cat's blood, a small whip, and a chair." It is said that the opposite of noise is silence. This isn't true. Silence is only the absence of noise. Silence would have been a terrible din compared to the sudden soft implosion of noiselessness that hit the wizards with the force of an exploding dandelion clock. A thick column of splintering light sprang up from the book, hit the ceiling in a splash of flames, and disappeared. Galdur stared up at the hole, ignoring the smoldering patches in his beard. He pointed dramatically. "To the upper cellars!" he cried, and bounded up the stone stairs. Slippers flapping and night sheet billowing, the other wizards followed him, falling over one another in their eagerness to be last. Nevertheless, they were all in time to see the fireball of Octarine potently disappear into the ceiling of the room above. "Erg," said one of the younger wizards, and pointed to the floor. The room had been part of the library until the magic had drifted through, violently reassembling the possible particles of everything in its path. So it was reasonable to assure that the small purple newt had been part of the floor, and the pineapple custard may once have been some books, and several of the wizards later swore that the small and sad I can't even say this. Orangutan. There we go. Small and sad orangutan sitting in the middle of it all looked very much like the head librarian. Galdur stared upwards. "To the kitchen!" he bellowed, waddling through the custard to the next flight of stairs. No one ever found out what the great cast-iron cooking range had been turned into, because it had broken down the wall and made good its escape before the deceived party of wide-eyed mages burst into the room. The vegetable chef was found much later, hiding in the soup cauldron, gibbling unhelpful things like, "The knuckles! The horrible knuckles!" The last wisps of magic, now somewhat slowed, were disappearing into the ceiling. To the great hall! The stairs were much wider here, and better lit. Panting and pineapple-flavored, the fittered wizards got to the top of it by the time the fireball had reached the middle of the huge, drafty chamber that was the university's main hall. It hung motionless, except for the occasional small prominence that arched and sputtered across its surface. Wizard smoke, as everyone knows. The probable exchange, that probably explained the chorus of coffin coughs and sawtooth wheezes that erupted behind Galder as he stood appraising the situation and wondering if he dared look for somewhere to hide. He grabbed a frightened student. "Get me seers, farseers, scarers, and within look man," he barked. "I want this studied." Something was taking shape inside the fireball. Galder shielded his eyes and peered at the shape forming in front of him. There was no mistaking it. It was the universe. He was quite sure of this, because he had a model of it in his study, and it was generally agreed to be far more impressive than the real thing. Faced with the possibility offered by seed pearls and silver filigrates, the creator had been at a complete loss. What? Faced with the possibilities offered by sea pearls. Okay, I don't get that one. But the tiny universe inside the fireball was uncannily, well, real. The only thing missing was color. It was all in translucent misty white. There was Gratitude, and the 4 elephants, and the disc itself. From this angle, Galder couldn't see the surface very well, but he knew with cold certainty that it would be absolutely accurately modeled. He could, though, just make out a miniature replica of Carrie Celestial, upon which utter peak the world's quarrelsome and somewhat bogarous gods lived in a place of marble abalaster and unquoted mosques, most three-piece suits they had chosen to call Dunmanfisten. It was always a considerable annoyance to any disc citizen with pretension to culture that they were ruled by gods whose idea of uplifting artistic expression was a musical doorbell. The little embryo universe began to move slowly, tilting. Galder tried to shout, but his voice refused to come out. Gently, but with the unstoppable force of an explosion, the shape expanded. He watched in horror, and then in astonishment, as it passed through him as lightly as a thought. He held out a hand, and watched the pale ghost of Rockstrema stream through his fingers in busy silence. Gratitude had already sunk peacefully below floor level, larger than a house. The wizard behind Galder was waist deep in seas. A boat smaller than a thimble caught Galder's eyes for a moment before the rush carried it through the walls and away. "To the roof!" he managed, pointing his shaking finger skyward. Those wizards with enough marbles left to think with, and enough breath to run, followed him, running through the continent that slithered smoothly through the solid stone. It was a still night, tinted with the promise of dawn. A crescent moon was just setting. Ankh-Morpork, largest city in the land around the Circle Sea, slept. The statement is not really true. On the one hand, those parts of the city which normally concern themselves with, for example, selling vegetables, shoe horses, carving exquisite small jade ornaments, changing money, and making tables, on the whole, slept, unless they had insomnia, or had got up in the night, as it might be, to go to the lavatory. On the other hand, many of the less law-abiding citizens were wide awake and, for instance, climbing through windows that didn't belong to them, slitting throats, mugging one another, listening to loud music in smoky cellars, and generally having a lot more fun. But most of the animals were asleep, except for the rats, and the bats too, of course, as far as the insects were concerned. The point is that descriptive writing is very rarely entirely accurate, and during the regime of Ulfquim II as patrician of Ankh, some Rules were passed in a determined attempt to put a stop to this sort of thing and introduce some honesty into reporting. Thus, if a legend said, a notable hero that all men spoke of his prowess, any bard who valued his life would add hastily, except for a couple of people in his home village who thought he was a liar, and quite a lot of other people who had never really heard of him. Poetic similarities were strictly limited to statements like, his mighty steed was as fleet as the wind on the fiery calm day, says about Force 3, and any loose talk about a beloved having a face that launched 1,000 ships would have to be backed by evidence that the object of desire did indeed look like a bottle of champagne. Quimly was eventually killed by a disgruntled poet during an experimental conduct in the palace grounds to prove that the disputed accuracy of the proverb, the pen is mightier than the sword, and in his memory it was amended to include the phrase, only if the sword is very small and the pen is very sharp. We're going to end on that confusing sentence. I know. But yeah, so that was the first part of Color of Magic, and now you can see why I started, not Color Magic, Light Fantastic right away, because this immediately follows after they're jumping, like it's not very long, so that's why we're doing it immediately right away. Anyways, I've been Endragh. This has been the Light Fantastic. I want to say the Light of Magic, and that's wrong. The Light Fantastic, and I hope I brought a smile to your face, and I'll see you tomorrow night. Night, night, guys.